Hey everyone, welcome to our Friday night wine tasting. I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits, and tonight we're doing the most esoteric, weird, and unheard of grape varieties you've never heard of. And I feel like I may have gone too far. Let's get some wine in our glasses. We'll start with the Raia Gavi here. And let me tell you why I think I may have gone just a little too far on this one. We have ventured well into the territory of some grape varieties that I actually hadn't heard of, or had heard once in passing and then filed that away under things I will never need to ever hear about again. There is one wine here that is made from a grape variety I legitimately never heard of before. There is one that comes from a name that showed up in my formal wine education and never since. And there is a wine that I have heard the name under one of its many synonyms once and then never again. I think that I made these the grape varieties that were too esoteric for me and perhaps were way too esoteric for you. On the plus side, they're all pretty cool, and we're going to talk about why. We're going to start with the Gavi de Gavi here, or rather the Raia Gavi, and it's now actually DOCG Cortese di Gavi, or DOCG Gavi. This is a North Italian wine coming from Piemonte. We'll cut to map cam in just a minute here, but I want to talk about just a big number that we're going to be talking about when it comes up. We're going to talk about how much plantings or how much of this wine is grown in terms of hectares in the world, and we're going to be comparing that back to a very big number. According to the best numbers that I could come up with, the most planted grape variety on planet Earth, and actually new on that list, it used to be Garnacha, but the most planted grape variety on planet Earth is Cabernet Sauvignon, with 340,000 hectares under vine as of an article published in June 2020, so reasonably recent. We're actually going to start with the grape variety that has the most of plantings of anything that we have here, and that's actually the Raia Gavi. There are approximately 3,000 hectares, or handsomely less than 1% compared to Cabernet Sauvignon of Gavi or Cortese under vine. So let's talk about what this is, where it comes from, and everything else. Aaron, you ready for some map cam?
Map cam.
Let's go to map cam. And I know I'm blocking the light. I'm going to do my best not to block the light. We ready to go on map cam?
Yep.
All right, so we are up here in the extreme northwest of Italy. This is Piedmont or Piemonte. Here's the city of Genoa, which you're probably quite familiar with. Here's Milan. Here's Turin, where they had the Olympics a few years ago, like a decade ago. But up here, about where the E in Piemonte is, right where my very fingertip is, that's where this first wine comes from. The region is known as Gavi, and for a very long time, so is the grape variety. In fact, the wine was for a very long time known as Gavi de Gavi. But the actual name of the grape variety is Cortese, which for those of you who've been really paying attention may recognize. The Gorgo Custoza here that we did a little while ago. Aaron's wildly gesturing at the camera to get this in shot. Sorry about that, Aaron. But when we did our good value wines tasting, we tasted this Gorgo Custoza, which is in part at least based in Cortese. So we have actually tasted this grape variety before once. So why is this a grape variety that you've never heard of? Why is this so hopelessly obscure? Well, it didn't used to be. One of the great things about us being as old as we are, founded in 1985, is we have our store library. And the Italian wine reference manual that my dad left us with when he retired is called Vino. And it was published in 1980, making it a few years older than I am. And I actually looked up just for laughs. This was not, the information I based the tasting around. But I did look up to what they actually said. And they said, okay, well, Cortese, it's grown around the region of Gavi. It's used in Gavi and a little bit in Custoza. It's broadly not very good, but there's potential because it's got high acid, but you'll find a few gems in the area, and you should really focus on those because they can be exceptional. Fast forward 40 years. Here's where we are today. I looked up some brand new information, some brand new, cutting edge stuff that's Aaron, why are we looking at your shoulder on? Oh, there we go. We're good. Sorry, the camera was entirely your shoulder for like. Yep. Your shoulder was quite. It was a good view of some plaid there. But anyway, I looked up like modern articles. I did a lot of reading on all of these wines. Actually, I did a ton of research. This one, it was exactly the same statement. Oh, well, it comes from this area around the village of Gavi. You know, there's Custoza and there's Gavi. They tend to be, high acid, but not very interesting. They tend to be very clean. But the really good examples you should seek out. That hasn't changed in 40 years. Let's talk a little bit about how this wine has kind of evolved over the years. I mentioned very briefly that this was a wine that used to be a bit of a big deal, and then it wasn't. Let's circle around to that very briefly. I'll bring out a couple other bottles from kind of behind the book here. I'm going to lay the book down because it's precarious as anything, and I'm about to take away about half its supports. I'm going to put these on top of the book very brief. No, I'm not. That's a terrible place to put them. That's much safer. I'm just going to keep a hand on those. So let's go back in time a little bit, even before Alberta was privatized in 1985 for wine sales at least. In the 1960s and 70s, Italian wine exports were really just getting off the ground. And, Tuscany was there. Asti Spumante has always been there. That was there. And then other than like the big names of Brunello and Barolo and Amarone, there really wasn't much of an export market. So the world at this point didn't really know the name Pinot Grigio. It wasn't the absolute monolithic steamroller of white wines that it is right now. That wasn't a thing. So when Italian wines first started popping up in the UK, in the United States, and in Canada, the white wine they actually led with was Cortese, and specifically, as they called it then, Gavi di Gavi. Now, over time, that shifted a little bit. By the mid-1980s, Gavi had started to fall off. Not because it wasn't good or because it wasn't interesting, but because it was slightly more expensive to make than Trebbiano. Trebbiano, if you are very, very careful and very good at what you're doing, you can make fascinating Trebbiano. That is not the case in about 99.5% of cases. Trebbiano is very literally a filler grape for a lot of really quite bad northern to central Italian wines, including Orvieto and Frascati. And for a very long period, Frascati and Orvieto kind of ran the Italian whites market. And I'd say that was true from the mid to late 1980s until kind of the early to mid 2000s. Like I can remember working here in this store, and I started in November of 2000, and we carried 3 Frascatis and like 4 or 5 Orvietos. So this very much carried into the 2000s, at least here. And then the obvious thing happened. Pinot Grigio came out, flexed its muscles, and everything else in an Italian white promptly ran away. So that's why this is reasonably obscure. So let's talk about what's in our glass. What are we talking about? Why is it here? It's like a Pearl Jam coat. Thank you, Jeremy. Well done. And yes, I did actually, bookend that by saying that if you're very careful, Trebbiano can be brilliant. Gavi di Gavi, based in Cortese, got its DOC rating in 1974, got its DOCG rating in 1998. Basically, these were legal grades. They basically say this is a region of significance and interest within Italy. We're going to put a minimum sugar level, a minimum acidity level, and at the DOCG level, a minimum tasting panel. Like you basically have to taste your own wine blind. So let's just say we're doing Gavi DOCG, and you're a Gavi winemaker. You will be sitting at a big round table with you and 15 of your other most senior peers in the industry. You all make really high-end Gavi for a living. You're sitting around this table. You will be brought out 16, 18 wines in a row, blind. You have no idea whether the wine is yours or someone else's or what have you, and it's pass-fail. Either this is Gavi as we spiritually see it, or it's not. You can actually be the deciding vote that fails your own wine for DOCG rating quite easily. So, what's in the glass? I get almonds, I get lemons, I get your classic winter fruits, so kind of apple pear. I get a little bit of kind of clean, maybe honeydew melon, green grass. It's got a roundness and a richness and a nuttiness that is really hard to nail down. Devin and I actually had a debate about this. We both knew this was a fairly nutty wine, and I kept pressuring him and saying, oh, well, I think the nuttiness has to be from Lee's aging. Like, is Cortese like really known to be nutty? I mean, there's not that much like data about that. And he's like, no, I think, you know, this wine just tastes nutty because that's what good Cortese tastes like. And I ended up getting the spec sheet from the winery, and Devin was absolutely right. The winemaker's notes, it says it goes into stainless steel tank for 6 months, but it doesn't talk anything about Lee's aging, so I don't think there's any Lee's aging. As much as this smells nice, I don't think that the nose is the I don't think the nose is the star here. I think the absolute star for the Raia Gavi is the absolutely massive textural mouthfeel on this. You get so much grip and roundness and fatness. The finish keeps going forever. You're still tasting it a solid 15 seconds, 20 seconds after you have the last sip. Yeah, almond skin right there. Devin and I had this wild, insane plan that almost kind of worked for Christmas of 2020. And instead of selling everyone Chardonnay and Riesling for their Christmas dinner wines, we were going to make it a very Cortese Christmas. And we had the Raia Gavi and the Gorgo Saint Michelin Custosa, which is at least a tiny bit of Gavi, and it's mostly Riesling and Garganega. But we wanted to like make these wines, Custosa and Gavi, a little more like, you know, mainstream, everybody's going to know them wines. And then Christmas happened. We got busy. And even though we had like the case stacks and up at the register, we kind of forgot about that plan. And so we ended up with a little bit of excess stock. I absolutely love this. I love that it's kind of making a bit of a comeback now. But I also find it interesting that reading a wine textbook from 40 years ago is basically the same as reading a wine textbook about this exact wine 40 years later. I think that's fascinating. And yeah, buttery, I don't know about buttery. I think it's more nutty. When I say buttery, I think this wine has undergone malolactic conversion. I don't think this wine actually has undergone malolactic conversion. So I think it's nutty, but not buttery necessarily, although they're very closely related flavors. And yeah, I mean, it's a wine that boomed in the 60s and 70s as the first white wine export out of northern Italy, or actually out of Italy basically, period. It got swamped by cheap Trebbiano that herded on that, and then it got absolutely destroyed by Pinot Grigio because Pinot Grigio became a damn brand unto itself. And now, years later, there's still a few really high quality Gavi producers doing their thing quietly in the background, making DOCG quality wines, and just keeping on. And it continues to be what it needs to be. And I really like it. This is a wonderful start to the night. Oh, I did actually want to just finish with one last thing. I actually put in my notes the reason why this is kind of a lost or unappreciated or underused grape variety. The reason that this in part lost out to Trebbiano and Pinot Grigio was big cooperatives and heavy overcropping of the grapes. Basically, the more grapes you grow on a single vine, the less interesting that vine, the finished wine is going to taste like. Cortese was really heavily cropped because Gavi was viewed as being, you know, entry-level, very simple Italian white. It took pretty aggressive cutbacks and very careful controls and a complete absence of watering to make really good Gavi. And as such, while this is a absolutely fascinating bottle of wine, this is not how most Cortese, even to this day, is made. Our best-selling Cortese in the store is still $15.95. It's a cracking good wine, the Gorgo Custosa, but it's still not this. It doesn't have the level of quality and texture to this. Okay, so let's jump on to our second wine. This is the Muller Catoir Scheurebe. And I actually last night had a little bit of an epiphany when I was doing the research for this. So Scheurebe is named for a guy named George Scheu. He came from the town of Alzey in the Rheinhessen in Germany. He lived between 1879 and 1949, and his whole thing was making a better German grape. He tried to improve Riesling. He tried to improve Sylvaner. He actually was the person who isolated how leaf roll disease was transmitted in the 1910s. They didn't actually find the virus and prove that it existed till 1966. He did a ton of research into chlorosis, which is a grapevine disease. He did a ton of interesting things, and more than that, he decided that this mad bastard, the 5,000 or 10,000 extant Vitis vinifera wine varieties that are out there, no, screw those. Those aren't interesting enough. I'm going to make my own. And so he did. And he made a few dozen. And the one that I think is the most interesting and is internationally recognized as perhaps being the most significant of all of the German varieties from this period is the one that, after his death, is named for him, Scheurebe. So let's set the scene here a little bit. It's the 1920s. We're in Germany. They're a little too obsessed with genetics. And at least on the wine side, they're really, really trying to take a very cold climate, narrow, foggy, stony wine region where it's very difficult to actually make wine consistently year over year over year, because it's at that northern bleeding edge of where it's actually commercially viable to make wine, to the point where still some of the best vineyards in the Rheingau and in the Mosel, they're too steep and too dangerous to actually be worth planting, because they're not worth paying the exorbitant amount it would cost to actually harvest them. Germany's really at the bleeding edge. So how a couple or three guys, we're going to talk about three. We're going to talk about George Scheu, we're going to talk about Hermann Muller, we're going to talk a really tiny amount, this is the one I didn't know before I went in, August Herold, who I only looked up at the very tail end of doing my research. These were three guys who were based in Germany, all contemporaries, all knew each other, as far as I can tell, because by Lord, there's very, very little information on these guys. English language articles, there are 2 on Hermann Muller. There is 1, and it's not very good, on George Scheu, and there is nothing on August Herold. Most of this I got off German language websites and just Google Translate, trying to get a little bit of information on this. But these 3 gentlemen basically were approaching an industry that wasn't in crisis at the time, although the First World War had really just ended, but they were trying to improve German winemaking to create a better Riesling, to create a better Sylvaner, to take existing German grapes and make them more commercially viable so they survive frost better, or survive hot weather when it was really sunny better, or grow better in stony soil, make more with less. And yeah, I see some people picking out the nose on this, and I absolutely love this. So I'm going to describe this nose to you just in case you don't have this in your glass yet. And if you don't, you really need to. What do I get off this? I get immediate big aromatics. I get grapefruit. I get some black currant or blackberry notes. There's definitely some berry here. I maybe get some tropicals like mango. What do I think I'm smelling? If you didn't, tell me this was a dry German Scheurebe, what would I assume I was tasting? Well, if your answer was Sauvignon Blanc, you're pretty darned close, because this is, up to a point, what the Germans, who do have quite a bit of Sauvignon Blanc planted in Germany, because it will grow there, they're actually pulling up Sauvignon Blanc right now to replace it with Scheurebe, because it's their grape from their country with their history, and it has a lot of notes the same. And Devin's right there with me on the blue fruit sneaking in. Less so than the last vintage, though. This definitely has blueberries, but they're more in the mouth than the nose. So yeah, when we talk about, grape varieties in a broader context, we tend to talk about things that are very, very old, like Sauvignon and Pinot that, spawned off a whole bunch of other varieties, including classic varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc. They all come from these long families. And then we have newer grapes. Cabernet Sauvignon itself, while it comes from a very old ancestry, it was only first propagated in the late 17th century. Pinotage, the red grape of South Africa that you all know that I'm a big fan of at least good examples of, that came out in like 1912, 1920. There are some 20th century varietals, but they're not very common. Most of the 20th century varieties that are out there actually come from two places. They come from a weird North American experiment post-phylloxera of Vitis labrusca grape varieties from North America being brought over to Europe, hybridized with Vitis vinifera varieties, and creating grape varieties that are really only grown now in Canada and a little bit in upstate New York, like Bac Noir and Maréchal Foch. If you like those varieties, and I do actually, they're really neat. If you don't, I completely understand. They're very different. The other side of it was not using these North American varieties. Let's just try and improve Vitis vinifera, European grape varieties, by crossing them with each other to do better, to make better versions of what we already know. That is still going on to this current day. I actually looked at a list of grape varieties created in the 20th century. I got to the end of A, and I was at 37 names. Like there's 5 different varieties that just start with the word Aurora alone. It's still a thing that's happening, but the big boom that we talk about in making hybrid varieties happened in the 1920s in Germany, and it happened largely in part because of George Scheu. This is a wine that Devin and I discovered when we were in Calgary. We were up there doing wine education. We were hanging out at Richmond Hill, like after class, bumming around like we always did. Like our routine became like, go to wine class all day, get off work, go to one of the better wine stores in Calgary. We could go to Metro Vino, or we go to Richmond Hill, or oh wow, I'm not. Apparently, I accidentally answered that call. Not going to take that again though. We'd end up going to like a wine boutique, and then we go to like a nice restaurant. This was just us bumming around at Richmond Hill and coming up with just hanging out with the guys there. Sorry, I keep getting calls. I'm getting a little distracted. And one of the guys at Richmond Hill was like, "Oh, you had this Scheurebe?" We're like, "No, it's a Scheurebe. Like it's a hybrid variety. Like it's a 21st century thing. We don't care." No, it's brilliant. You have to have it. So we tasted it, we loved it, and we brought it in. And then it kind of sat for a little bit. The last vintage of this actually proved very tricky to sell because it was a little bit off-putting. The new vintage of this is absolutely rock star. And I absolutely love it. I want to talk a little bit about the grape varieties and why, the reason why we don't see this anymore. Oh, also while I'm in my notes here, I do want to send a happy birthday out to Wayne Rosanowski, who apparently is 67 today. Thank you very much for watching, Wayne. I hope you're enjoying the white wines at least, and we'll be on to the reds here in a minute. So we've got 3 basically German scientists making really, really interesting German hybrids, and they're getting absolutely nowhere with these, all through the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s. Then World War II breaks out. Now, in World War I, Germany wasn't that devastated in terms of the vineyards and everything else. It was trench warfare. It didn't move a whole lot. By the end of the war, there was still a front. With World War II, the front on both sides collapsed, and troops reached Berlin. They marched all the way across Germany, causing huge devastation just because of, the cost of war. Coming out of the Second World War, Germany was once again effectively bankrupt. They had no money to pay for like high-end Riesling crossings or to plant with anything really premium, but they had all these hybrid varieties that could be had for effectively nothing because the universities have been propagating cuttings of these, and it was like, oh, can we just buy 10,000 of those cuttings? They're like, I guess, sure. And that was what Germany was replanted with after the Second War. Scheurebe in part, but the big one, and the reason I mentioned Hermann Muller, was a grape variety that we now know and hate called Muller Thurgau. Now, Muller Thurgau, also known as Rivener. For everyone here saying, wow, Germany makes dry white wine, Yeah, you have Muller Thurgau to thank for that. Muller Thurgau is the grape variety behind every bad peace porter you've ever had, every awful Liebfraumilch you've ever had, those god-awful cat-shaped German bottles that I refuse to sell that have like the neck of the bottle sticking out of their head like some horrifying tumor or something. That was Muller Thurgau. That is why everyone had, and who grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, they always had like sweet, sticky, very boring, very uninteresting German white wine at like Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter dinners. It was because of Muller Thurgau, and that was what was planted everywhere. That was just, at one point it was 48% of Germany's plantings was Muller Thurgau. Sorry, 48% was all of the hybrid varieties. Muller Thurgau would have been about 80% of that. But it was a huge amount. It has been in free fall since about 1995. It's now well under 20% of total plantings. I expect it'll be under 10% by the end of the 2020s. But there's other grape varieties in there too. Muller Thurgau is still the most planted of all of the hybrid varieties, followed by Kerner. Kerner is, I think, along with Scheurebe, perhaps the two of the hybrid varieties that will still survive post, Germany cleaning up its act. There is no home for Muller Thurgau. There just isn't, unless you're making bulk wine. But I think Scheurebe and Kerner will actually survive. That was actually how I found August Herold, is he's actually the man who invented both Kerner and Dornfelder. As much as we just dragged Muller Thurgau, Hermann Muller, in addition to that, also invented the grape variety Bacchus, which is a little more interesting. But while Hermann Muller was definitely more famous in his lifetime, he was definitely considered the more successful person. George Scheu's contributions have definitely lasted longer. He made Scheurebe. He made a grape variety called Huxelrebe. I'll pull this out here. This is another grape variety. This is a grape variety called Zygareba, and it's really fun because this actually comes from the vineyard of Alsaer Rotenfels. The ER is a placeholder, so meaning from this town. George Scheu did all his work in the village of Alzey, and this is literally from the Rotenfels vineyard of the village of Alzey. So this is from his hometown with his grape variety Zygareba, which was also known as winning vine. The irony for a country that lost that war. But it's actually now the most planted grape variety in Belgium of all bloody things. And he also, in collaboration with Hermann Muller, made a grape variety called Farberebe, which I've never seen in a bottle, at least not in North America. So, that was a really long-winded, insane thing, but once I started digging into the history of George Scheu and the history of Scheurebe, I got so into this, and this whole secret history of what had happened of these three prominent people and then an entire group of scientists around them that tried to remake the wine industry basically from the ground up in the 1920s, or at least make the German wine industry over. It was absolutely fascinating to me. Also, this wine freaking owns. I absolutely love this. Any thoughts on the Scheurebe before we move on? And yes, Germany is most definitely my geek zone. It's where I'm most comfortable. Okay, so these I had a pretty clear idea that the Gavi was going to go before the Scheurebe. These two, I had a little bit of a hard time picking a tasting order. In the end, I chose to go with the Passalacqua Avo ahead of the Marcillac. So this is Valentina Passalacqua, and I find it very interesting that in southern Italy, which is perhaps the most regressive and old-fashioned and corrupt part of Italy, where it's very much a man's world, so to speak, down there, the two brightest stars in winemaking in this part of Italy are Valentina Passalacqua and Arianna Occhipinti. I can't think of another region on earth where the absolute two unquestioned top of the ladder, like they're in their own tier, everyone else is below them, are women, and that this is the only part of the world where that's true. And Valentina Passalacqua, while she's a little newer than Ariana Occhipinti, I think is probably right now a little more famous. This is coming from Puglia. I said Valentina, didn't I? What did I say? I might not have said Valentina. Aaron is apparently not paying attention in the slightest. Let's jump over to map cams here.
Map cam.
How's dry February going for you there, Aaron? You seem really enthused.
The shit.
Yeah, I can tell. So Puglia is down here. It is the boot of Italy down here. And right here is the town of Foggia. I actually had to draw the dot on because it wasn't on the map. So we are definitely into obscure wine country here. So this grape variety on this one is Nero di Troia, or Red of Troy. Now, you know, we're talking about like the Homeric stories where, you know, they go to Troy and they use a horse to get in the city, and, you know, broadly bad things happen to the people of Troy. There's not a lot of actual evidence that this grape variety comes from Troy. In fact, there's actually quite a bit of evidence that it doesn't. Ampelographers or wine geneticists have actually looked at this grape. They've kind of mapped it to everything around it. The closest match they can have to this is in Croatia and northern Greece, which, you know, there's the entirety of Greece between that and, you know, western Turkey, where we think the city of Troy was. So probably not actually from Troy. But what is it? Well, let's talk about the Puglian wine industry. Puglian wine industry is very, very far behind the rest of Italy. So let's say before 10 years ago, what were we selling in the shop? Let's just cut out white for now and just talk about red. Well, there are three things we were selling. We were selling Tuscany, which is Chianti and Brunello di Montalcino and Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. Like, that was its own thing. We were selling the stuff from Veneto or from Verona, so your Valpolicellas and your Amarones and your Ripassos. That was its own thing. And then the third category was literally everything else lumped together. Didn't matter if it was Sardinia or Sicily or Puglia. Piemonte had like its own thing, but we didn't sell enough of it to really be separate. All of Italy was just this amorphous blob. And one of the great things that we've seen happen over the last 2.5, 3 years is I had somebody who came into the store today and was just like, you know what I want to talk about? I want to talk about things from Piedmont specifically. Bought a whole bunch of Piemontese wine and then ordered like a case of a Barolo I'd never heard of before. The market's changed, and that's wonderful. Puglian wine is getting there. We've been selling wine from the Puglian region of Salento basically as long as I've worked here, but those were based in the Negro Amaro grape variety, which is a very high acid, very high tannin grape variety, not that dissimilar in terms of coloration and tannin content to Nebbiolo. It's very aggressive, very fiery, almost bitter when it's young, and then very slowly opens. You want to drink it almost 10 years old. Primitivo is the other major grape variety grown in this part of the world, and it went on to have a much more successful career as Red Zinfandel in California. You want the ammo, Mike?
Certainly.
What do you think of that Scheurebe?
That was very, very nice.
I liked it too, yeah. I think that's my leader of the night so far. I really loved that. I mean, surprise, surprise, my leader's the German wine, but you know. Yeah, there's lots of Italian claims about things being Trojan. That's certainly true. Well, I said Ariana Occhipinti and Valentina Passalacqua. I talked about both of them as being like southern winemakers, but okay, I'm getting distracted here. So we have Negro Amaro, which is kind of the known wine from the region, and you know we have lots of examples of that in the shop. Like, that's a real thing that we carry lots of. This is not a particularly good one, but you know we have it. The other one is Primitivo, which went on to have a long storied career as American Zinfandel. So let's talk about the third one. This is a wine that is not exactly popular. I'll jump back to that 340,000 hectares of Cabernet Sauvignon planted in the world. There's about 1,200 hectares of this. So like about 1/3 of 1% of Cabernet's plantings. I did write down Scheurebe's as well. Scheurebe's was about 1,500 hectares, so just slightly more. And this is absolutely rockin' good. The reason that this is not as widely planted as not as widely known. So let's talk within Puglia. Well, let's talk about without Puglia first. Let's talk about the world. When I was saying that, you know, previously our wine market was literally Tuscany, Verona, maybe Piedmont, maybe like Barolo and Barbaresco, and then literally everything else. Even in that everything else, Puglia was at the absolute bottom. We were talking about Campanian Alianicos and Sicilian Nero d'Avolas and North Italian like Teroldegos before we were talking about wine from Puglia. It was the afterthought of an afterthought. It was absolutely at the bottom. And then within Puglian wine, at the bottom was Nero di Troia. And the reason within Puglia is slightly different. It's not that it's not marketable, it's not that it's not delicious, it's that it takes about 2.5 weeks to 5 weeks longer, 2.5 longer than Primitivo, 5 weeks longer than Negro Amaro, pardon me, to actually ripen. So if you get an early season hail, your Negro Amaro's fine. You picked that at the end of August. Your Primitivo, it probably came off to the mid to end of September. You're probably picking your Nero di Troia in like, the second week of October, third week of October. Like, you're getting dangerously close. And I know this is a peninsula, it sticks out into the Mediterranean Ocean. It's hot there, I get that. But you still get hail, you still get late season events that can really screw up your crop. Some of you might get a little bit of fizz because this is a natural wine. I have absolutely none. The wine is not supposed to be sparkling, but you may get a little tiny bit of secondary ferment. Nose was a little offensive at first. That is a reductive nose. It probably smelled slightly fecund or like horse a little bit. That happens with natural wines. Reduction is basically just a little bit of trapped air. It's a process that happens basically in an anaerobic environment. This little bit of trapped air becomes effectively oversaturated with CO2 and becomes slightly sour. And it changes the dynamic of the wine. It's a different thing, but it does just blow off. Tasting notes: blackberries into blueberries into currants. I'd like to say I'm getting much more than the primary fruit, maybe some white pepper. Maybe something deep down that reminds me a little bit of milk chocolate. But it's all about that blackberry, blueberry fruit. It's so pretty and so likable. It just wants to be your friend. And it comes in a liter, so you'll have lots of time to become friends with it. I don't know, it's a charming, charming wine. It's not the world's most serious thing, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah, that was absolutely wonderful. All right, let's move on to our last wine here, the Marcillac. Le sang del pays, the blood of the soil. This was an interesting one. This comes from the southwest of France, and we are going to come over to map cam here, if you'd be so good, Aaron.
All right.
I'll just walk around and wreck your light again, like I always do. So here's the city of Bordeaux. Coming down here is the Garonne. Moving north is the Dordogne. Now understand that historically the big wine export market is up here in Britain. Now if you're going to be shipping your wine, out of France, you don't want to be shipping over here. You want to be shipping out of Bordeaux, or you want to be shipping out of the Nantais, which is up here. You don't really want to have to try and ship out of the Med, because you have to go all the way around Spain, out past Morocco and all that. So if you're upriver of Bordeaux, you are utterly dependent on the Bordelais giving you a fair deal on shipping and duties and everything else. Spoiler warning, the Bordelais were historically massive, massive dicks about this. So the wines of the Southwest France are really, really unknown, purely because their shipping to export markets, their ability to make a name for themselves in the same way that Burgundy or the Loire or Bordeaux did, was absolutely ruined by the fact that the Bordeaux would throw massive, massive tariffs on the wines as they were leaving the port of Bordeaux. So, like famous names like Madaran, Cahors, lesser names like Gaillac or Bouzet, or even Bergerac, they were actually hit with big, heavy tariffs to keep them out of the market. Now, we're way the heck up here in the middle of absolute nowhere in Marcillac. Like, I've never in my life had an Entraigues, an Estaing, or a Rodez. I've never, ever had something from that. The Massif Central, by the way, is a massive Central Highlands region of France. It's cut off by from the Alps by the Rhone River. It's more or less an extension of the Alps that's cut off by the big river valley formed by the Rhone. But that's where we are. We're in this upriver tiny region that nobody really knows because it got absolutely ruined by tariffs. Sorry, I'm cutting the mic cable. We're good. And it's so... It reminds me of the wines when I first started drinking French wine that tasted so rustic. This tasted so backwards and so earthy and so different. The grape variety here is Fer, also known as Fer. Pardon me, this one I actually have to look up because I've never seen it actually listed this way. Apparently the preferred name is Fer Servadou. I've never seen it listed that way. I'm familiar with it as Fer. I'm reasonably familiar with it as Mansois. I've never seen it as Fer Servadou. It's used in Gaillac a little tiny bit along with Duras. It's used in Madaran along with Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, and Tannat. But about 90% of its plantings are in Marcillac. And in total, all of the plantings in Marcillac are 150 hectares. Reminder, Cabernet Sauvignon is 340,000. This isn't even a rounding error compared to Cabernet Sauvignon. They can plant that in an afternoon for Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's this tiny thing that nobody knows about. And yet, it's the entire foundation of the Marcillac wine industry. Fer means iron. It refers to both the fact that it is grown on really high iron content soils, and also the wood of the vines is very, very hard. This was something that I found very interesting. Half the places I looked this up said it was the wood, half said it was the soil, and then finally there was one guy who found himself in the same place I did, who done all the research and was like, half of them say this, half of them say that. Screw it, it's both. The wood's hard and it's grown on iron. It's both. I like this just because how rustic it is. I like how old-fashioned this tastes. It's rich and it's spicy and it's broad, and it reminds me of the best parts of the Languedoc. It reminds me of, French peasant wine in the best possible way. It's earthy and leathery and chunky, and just you always want to be going back for another glass because it's always interesting. You're always going to find out more about it, but it's also just rustic and likable. It's got a lot of hard edges. It's not smooth and polished like a California Merlot. This is a wine that you kind of have to come around to. If we tasted this first, it probably wouldn't have come off very well because our palates wouldn't be used to drinking wine. It's all hard edges, and I quite like it. And it's very rarely very expensive. I think we're selling this for like $22, $23. It's not expensive, but it's just wonderful to drink. But yeah, these are grape varieties that even I had to look up, had to do a ton of digging into, had no idea about half of it with at least three. I had a pretty good handle on Scheurebe. I broadly knew what Cortese was, mostly because I did a lot of research on Cortese to talk about the Custozas. I had no idea about Nero de Troia, and I had very little idea about Fair or Mansois. I love doing these ones where I have to do more reading and do more research because I learn so much, and I hope that I could pass it on to you. Ooh, what would I pair this with? I'm thinking like bistro food, like it's a chunky burger and like good fries. Not, you know, like bad fries from like, you know, a fast food place, but like good fries fried in like a decent oil. This and like a really fat burger, maybe made a little bit like medium rare, extra pickles. Yeah.
Shut up.
Come on. I'm
killing me here.
Are you also on a diet as well as doing? Okay, let's find out what's going on with Aaron. Aaron update. So you're doing dry February. Are you also on a diet?
No, good God.
Okay.
I'm not a madman.
I was gonna say.
Jesus. In fact, it's gone right down the tubes.
Fair enough. Yeah, it seems like you go nuclear with the right food. I think all of these would. Yeah, brie and French bread. Yeah, bistro food, like very simple, very earthy, very rustic foods. This is a simple rustic wine paired with simple rustic foods. It doesn't need to be paired with, you know, beef bourguignon that you've had simmering all day. That deserves not a better wine, but perhaps a more refined wine. This is very raw and a hard edge, and it's like, you know what? I threw some meat and cheese and bread on a plate and called it charcuterie because, you know, screw it. This would do fine with that. That's beautiful with that. I realized as we finished our fourth wine that we completely skipped talking about Shameless Promotion Corner and completely skipped all of our wine tastings and everything else that's coming up. Well, we have time. Yeah. Let's touch on those very briefly because we do have some neat stuff coming up, and then I will give a ranking because wow, do I not know how I'm going to rank these. I have an idea, but wow, do I not know how I'm going to do that. What's coming up first? Coming up first is Wednesday. Wednesday's going to be fun. Wednesday, I am doing an establishment tasting night exclusively of their seasonals. Establishment's been on a little bit of a run lately doing different stuff. So we're going to be doing 4 different seasonals. Their double IPA, their Belgian Pale, their rhubarb ginger sour, and finally their cut the cake cocoa chocolate stout. So that'll be really fun. And then we're actually doing it in association with the SAG. So we're going to have Ferris Haitia joining us. He's a stand-up comedian, and he's going to be here to like rip on me, rip on Aaron, just generally like be here and be really, really entertaining. Much funnier than me, I guarantee you. Because of that, we're going to be charging $30 for this one. $10 of that is just a straight-out donation to the SAG because, like a lot of people, they're struggling with COVID because they can't really have people in the museum. They can't do their SAG Craft Beer Festival or their art auction. It's been tough on them. We're going to help them out. We're going to bring in a comedian. It could either be brilliant or it could be a complete disaster and be funny in spite of itself. I can't wait to find out which. Next up, we have next week's spirits tasting, and you think I did research for this one. Next week is going to be Mezcal, and God help me. So for $35, you get yourself a tiny little box like this. Inside, you will get a little bottle each of a silver tequila, 3 different single variety mezcals, and a sotol. Sotol is like a tequila or mezcal, but even more obscure and very different. I have a tiny bit of experience with sotol. Again, this is what I'm going to do a bit of reading on. This is going to be a lot of fun. So that's coming up a week from today on the Friday night next week. Again, like the stand-up comedy night, that's either going to be brilliant or wow, that's going to be a disaster because I've run out of things to talk about. Oh, where do we start with rankings? I don't even have your help because you're not drinking the wines, Aaron.
Yeah.
Rankings. Where the heck do I put these? Can I cheat and ask everyone else for their rankings first? Because it's a tough lineup. I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, but those two could really... This is a clear 1, this is a clear 2. I'm a little questionable on these, but I'm going to finish at 3-4. Thoughts for the rest of you? Ideas? Where are we ranking these? Oh wow, the complete opposite. We go 1, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 2. Oh wow, somebody's my number 1 dead last. That's awesome. I love that. 4, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3. Just 1 and 2 straight out. Oh, that's fun. One and 4 didn't do 2 and 3. 4, 1, 2, 3. I'm loving how much love we have for 4. I think 4 is literally the least expensive wine that we have on the table tonight, which is very fun. Which I love that everybody likes it. That's wonderful. All right, Rob's on my team. 2, 4, 3, 1. Thank you. Any questions about this? We've covered an absolutely terrifying amount of ground with this tonight. We've glossed over some huge concepts that normally I would take more time to talk about. Any questions? I mean, I've gone over a lot of ideas here. So if there are a lot of questions. You can't seem to love natural wine will ever grow on you. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Only one thing tonight was natural, and that was the Passalacqua. The rest of these were at least somewhat non-natural. Although I wouldn't say any of these were made in a really heavily commercialized style either. I'd say most of these were, if not organic. I know that the Raia is Demeter certified. I know that both of these are made with very, very limited intervention. If they're not quite natural, you're on the road. If you liked anything tonight, you at least are on that road. Yeah, it was a very nerdy event. I will freely grant that, Jeremy, but it was fun. Thank you all very much for watching. I think we're gonna wrap it up here, Aaron. We were in and out very quickly for a very wordy topic. You know, not so bad. Felt good.
Nailed it.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. We will see you Wednesday night for beer tasting or Friday night for Mezcal. We will have another wine tasting 2 weeks from tonight. Topic to be announced because I haven't figured out what it's going to be yet. Thank you all so much and good night.